Hello everyone, I hope you're sitting comfortably with a nice mug of cocoa or a glass of wine whilst I chat to you about some of the finds collected during your field walking campaigns. It's become clear that over the last few years, the Mesolithic Deeside group have gathered a fabulous amount of archaeological information. It's allowing us to gain a broad understanding of how the landscape around this stretch of the Dee was occupied in prehistory. The good news is that Caroline Wickham-Jones and others are drawing together all the data that you've collected, and hopefully it will be published before too long. In the meantime, there's been a lot of information shared about the Mesolithic on your fantastic Lockdown YouTube channel. Caroline has given you a broad picture of Mesolithic life, and Chantal Conneller has looked at Mesolithic burial practices across Britain. Closer to home, we've heard from Sheila and Ali about the background and aims of the Mesolithic Deeside project, and from Irvin too about mapping the finds. I just want to say thanks to Irvin for all the maps he's produced for this talk. Although the majority of the finds made along the Dee will date to the Mesolithic, the field walking has also recovered worked lithics dating to the final Upper Paleolithic, about 14,000 years ago, as well as to the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, about 4,000 years ago. So we have identified a span of about 10,000 years of prehistoric occupation along this stretch of the Dee from your field walking alone. For this talk, I'm going to look at the worked lithics from all four of the main occupations: the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, the early Neolithic, and the late Neolithic. So the story begins on a frosty January day this year. Ali zoomed in on this prettily coloured orange flint as it poked out from the frozen ground. Ice crystals were clinging to its surface. As she held the flake, the frost melted from it, and it was popped into a bag with the coordinates and find number written on the front to be entered later, along with hundreds of other finds in the Excel spreadsheet. This map shows you how it all looks when the lithics from the field walking are mapped. The dense clusters, right on the north side of the river, at Nethermills and East Park, show the intense activity in these areas, possibly made up of repeated occupations throughout the Mesolithic period, and probably spanning several thousand years. But within these scatters are traces of earlier and later occupations. The first flint artefacts I want to talk about are leaf arrowheads. These were made in the early Neolithic, so immediately after the late Mesolithic. Blade production was still important, but they had stopped using microliths and were shaping flakes with bifacial retouch to make leaf-shaped arrowheads. Here is one found at Balbride, as represented by the green triangle in the north, just by the river. And then there is another one at West Durris, also on the south side of the river, again shown by the green triangle. And here we have the leaf points in person. On the left, you'll see the lovely orange flint of the one from West Durris, and this is a fine ogival form. It's complete and looks quite fresh. Whereas on the far right-hand side is the leaf point from Balbride. It is a fragment and it has been burnt. In the middle is our latest leaf point, which hasn't been recorded yet but was found this year. I would have expected to find more of these leaf points along the river, and this is based on some work I did on an extensive excavation in Yorkshire, which had a large multi-period flint assemblage spanning the Mesolithic to the Bronze Age. The early Neolithic leaf points were all concentrated along the relict stream channel that ran through the site from the north to the south. This suggested to me that there were organised hunting practices for particular types of game along the course of the stream. There may be several reasons for not finding so many leaf points along the Dee. Perhaps the leaf points have already been collected by antiquarians. They are a very obvious, a very pretty tool, so perhaps they have been over-collected. Perhaps they haven't been found because the right areas haven't been targeted for field walking. This period of occupation may have preferred a different type of landscape, although interestingly there are two early Neolithic houses close by at Clarke and Balbride. Another reason why leaf arrowheads were not common is because maybe they weren't used in the early Neolithic. Perhaps the conditions along the river were unsuitable for attracting the game that they wanted. Perhaps the water was too fast flowing. Alternatively, they may have used other materials, for example, wooden tipped arrows for hunting birds. The next find I want to consider is a bipolar core from Park Smiddy. Here it is, it's represented by the red star in the scatter. As you can see, the lithic scatter is less dense here than right beside the river, and this is in fact set back from the river quite a bit. A bipolar core is a piece of flint which has been held on an anvil and struck from above. Flakes come off from either end and from both faces and often leaves a chisel-like edge. These are likely to date to the late Neolithic. At this period, they often reworked flakes and core fragments from earlier periods. Here it looks as if they used a flake from a contemporary Neolithic knapping event. I just wanted to show you how much these cores differ from the earlier Mesolithic blade cores. Here on the left you see a standard Mesolithic blade core. It's got a single platform at the top. Regular blades have been struck from the face of this pebble. In contrast, the bipolar core on the right produces much scrappier flakes. And in fact, I sometimes wonder if these fine bipolar cores were deliberately worked bifacially in order to make a chisel-like edge. This could then have been used for wood or bone working, perhaps as small wedges for splitting. I'm not aware of anyone who might have investigated this microwear analysis, but it might be an interesting avenue to pursue. Here, in contrast, is a late Neolithic flint knife from Findrak, which is a bit further inland again from the river. I include this to show you that there is also a lot of very fine flint working during the late Neolithic. In fact, flint knapping in this period was a bit Jekyll and Hyde. It was split between organised flake production to produce blanks for these fine knives and scrapers, and the scrappy incidental flint knapping making use of earlier debitage to produce simple flakes. Up next, and we're back to Balbride to look at a blade which was pretty much the star of the show this last winter. It's plotted in the scatter as that orange diamond. And here it is. One of the main reasons I was interested in this blade was because of this possible hafting residue which I've circled. It is quite brown in colour, and it was hard, and I hadn't noticed it on any other lithics from the field, so I thought it was possible that it was hafting residue. Now, on the right hand side, this is Andy, who is using birch tar and sinew to basically wrap a long pointed blade onto a stick. I think this time he's making a spear to spear some fish. And so what would remain when the haft had rotted away, and possibly most of the sinew and most of the residue might be part of the birch bark tar. So I got in touch with Amy Little from the University of York, and she suggested that Dr. Alexandre Lecoin had a look at it. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to extract any organic component from the residue to determine if it had been hafted with something like birch tar. So for the moment, we can't tell if this residue has just been picked up from the soil or if it was something to do with use. Dr. Amy Little then passed it on to Jess Bates, a postgrad who was looking at microwear traces on the flints from the well-known Mesolithic site Clarke in Yorkshire. Using a microscope, she was able to identify polish along one edge of the blade, which suggested it had been used a short while on a soft plant material like grass or withies. These micropolishes on prehistoric tools don't often survive to the present day, and it is quite remarkable that we can look at this blade and know it had been used several thousand years ago, perhaps near the very spot it was found. But that is not the end of the story. Jess had recognised this distinctive banded flint on the blade from Clarke, and here they are together with the Clarke blade on the top and the Balbride blade underneath. There are so many questions from this picture alone. First of all, it is an unusual form of flint. With the black band in both cases, they've chosen to produce a blade where the band goes across the middle of the piece. Is this a coincidence, or are they from the same nodule? Where could that nodule have come from? Was there a fascination for stripy blades in the Mesolithic? Does it indicate travelling between these two sites, some 300 miles apart? Or perhaps it was a tool passed along a line? We'll probably never know the answer to any of these questions, but we should keep an open mind when considering the possibilities. Our last find is actually a group of lithics from East Park. Here's the scatter they form part of. It's an extensive Mesolithic scatter spread across the field, but within it is a group of earlier lithics, probably made during the final Paleolithic period, about 14,000 years ago. At this period, nomadic herders or hunters followed reindeer across the landscape as it was intermittently exposed during periods of advance and retreat of the last glaciers. The finds we're interested in are 6 end scrapers, a large blade and a shouldered point. The occupants of the site didn't settle here permanently, and we don't know the extent or even direction of their travels, but we can get some idea by looking at the raw materials they used for their tools. Some of the flint they used for the scrapers here is an interesting banded black and grey flint, which is not local to Scotland and must have been brought by the occupants from a distant location, probably further east. That land is perhaps now underwater or is part of Scandinavia or the North European plain. The blade on the left-hand side is long and crested. This type of working was typically shaped to guide the removal of robust blades from a large blade core. The flint for the blade too must have been brought in from further east, as it is made from a larger nodule than we can find amongst the drift deposits of flint in the present-day landscape. On the right-hand side is a shouldered point. It's an armature which probably dates to the late Upper Paleolithic. The typology for these types of point is tricky, and ideally we want to find 1 or 2 in a carbon-dated context through excavation to sort the matter out. What is interesting about this group of tools is the 2 concentrations they form in relation to the otherwise extensive spread of lithic finds. And in this case, near the track at East Park, you've got 4 scrapers and the large crested blade, and then just further down we've got the shouldered point and 2 scrapers. It's interesting to see how the groups of early artefacts stand out at East Park, and this is mirrored at other sites in the region. In comparison to the large spreads of late Mesolithic flints, the late Upper Paleolithic artefacts in Scotland tend to be found in discrete groups such as Howburn in Lanarkshire, Lunenhead in Angus and Mill Timber in Aberdeenshire. This raises the question of at East Park, do these groups represent working areas or perhaps even structures? And we can only answer this with some careful excavation over the area of the spread of lithics. The second main point about the grouping of Paleolithic artefacts is that if they haven't moved far, then does that mean that the late Mesolithic artefacts also haven't moved far and that they haven't been spread across the field by ploughing, and that in actual fact they were already spread across the field during that period? So that is something else to consider. And that is our romp through a few artefacts from your thousands that you've collected over the last few years. And there is a story behind every artefact, and also lots and lots of questions which one day we might get to answer. But in the meantime, carry on the good work, and good luck for the next fieldwork season.